Dear student, welcome to the next lecture of Econ 121 Fundamentals of Agricultural Economics. Today's lecture is very interesting because today we are going to learn about the law, that is law of diminishing marginal utility, which is most important topic of this course. Okay, so we have to know what is cardinal approach. Here in this lecture we have to study of the behavior of consumer. Basically there are two approaches to study the behavior of consumer. In that, first one is the cardinal approach, another one is the ordinal approach. So in a cardinal approach, firstly we have to study about the law of diminishing marginal utility. In that we have to see the statement, then the assumptions of the law, then some explanation with the help of some example, then limitations and importance of the law. So in this lecture we will study about the law of diminishing marginal utility, that is LDMU. Now first, if we think about the consumer behavior, so there are two techniques to analyze the consumer behavior. So utility analysis or Marshallian approach, which utility can be measured, that is the cardinal approach. That is the cardinal approach. And second one is the indifference curve technique. So the former approach, means the approach given by Marshall, is known as the cardinal approach, and another approach, that is the indifference curve technique, that is the ordinal approach. So the law of diminishing marginal utility, the law of equimarginal utility, and concept of consumer surplus, that comes under the cardinal approach. And indifference curve analysis, it is based on assumptions of ordinal approach or ordinal utility. Okay, so now we have to discuss about the law of diminishing marginal utility. Before that, you must know what is meant by cardinal approach. So the approach in which utility is measured numerically in a numbers or in a unit, that is the cardinal approach. Now this law of diminishing marginal utility comes under the cardinal approach, and this law was initially formulated by German economist H. Gosen. That's why law of diminishing marginal utility is also known as the first law of Gosen. Okay, so this law says that more a commodity that an individual having or individual possess, the less the utility that is derived from it. Means if you have a more commodity, more amount of commodity or more quantity of that particular commodity, the utility of that commodity is decreases. The utility of that commodity is decreases. So more emphatically, the law is based on the observation that each successive unit of commodity brings in a lesser and lesser utility until the point of satiation is reached. Okay, so up to the particular point of satiation or full satisfaction, the utility decreases. Now after the point of satiation or after the point of full satisfaction is reached, the further consumption results in the disutility. Further consumption means more consumption results in the disutility, that is the consumer derives negative satisfaction. So more and more we have a thing, the less and less we want it. More and more we have a particular thing, less and less we want it. So it is evident through this law that through some goods have a greater utility than others, subsequent units of some goods give diminishing satisfaction. Now the statement of law, you just remember this law was first formulated by German economist H. Gosen. That's why this law is known as the Gosen's first law. And statement of this law, which was given by Alfred Marshall. So according to the Marshall, this law states that the additional benefit a person derives from a given increase of his stock, the additional benefit a person derives from a given increase of his stock of anything of anything diminishes with the growth of stock he has, diminishes with the growth of stock he has. So this is a specific statement of law of diminishing marginal utility. You have to remember as it is. Okay. Now we will explain this law with the help of example. Before going to the example, we must know some assumptions and some concept. Assumptions means we have to suppose something. As we know, in the laws of physics, we assume something. In the law of algebra, we assume something. So these are the some assumptions. Means if we have to apply this particular law on a particular commodity, so we have to assume something to apply this law. So first assumption is the units of that particular commodity consumed in a succession should be identical in size. Means should be identical means should be same in size, identical in color means same in color, taste, freshness, maturity, that is homogeneity is the basic requirement of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Means that commodity must be same in the size, same in the color, same in the taste, same in the freshness, even same in the maturity also. So homogeneity is the basic requirement of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Then second assumption, the consumption of the units or consumption process of the commodity should be continuous without any interval. Means you should continuously eat that particular commodity. Means the process of consumption should be continuous. If there should not be a gap during the consumption process, so the law become inoperative if a condition is violated. Means if you take the gap, you can eat more and more amount. Okay, so that's why that consumption process must be continuous. There should not be any gap or any interval in the consumption of commodity. The next, third, during this particular activity, it is assumed that taste, preference, income remains unchanged. Means taste of that consumer, preference of that consumer and income of that consumer must be unchanged or remains unchanged. So these are the three conditions or these are the three assumptions of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now we know the assumptions, when in which condition we have to apply this law. Now we must know the some concepts. So first concept is initial utility. So the utility that derived from the consumption of first unit of commodity, the utility derived from the consumption of first unit of commodity, that is the initial utility. Then second, marginal utility. So it is the additional utility derived by an individual by the consumption of one more unit of commodity. What is marginal utility? It is the additional utility. Suppose I have consumed 1 unit, I got the utility of 10, then I will consume one additional unit, then I will get the utility of 12. So how much is increase? That 2, means that 2 is the marginal utility. Means additional utility that derived from the consumption of next unit of commodity, that is the marginal utility. The next is total utility. So simply it is the sum amount of satisfaction derived from the consumption of different units derived from the all units of commodity, means sum of consumption that is derived from the all units of commodity, that is the total commodity. The next is zero utility. So when the consumption of commodity makes no addition into the total utility, then it is the point of zero utility. Means when we consume the another or next unit of commodity and it does not add any satisfaction or it does not add any utility into the total utility, then that is the point of zero utility. The next is our last concept, which is most important, negative utility. If the consumption of commodity is carried excess, means if you consume the excessive amount of commodity, so that commodity instead of giving satisfaction, it will give you dissatisfaction or it will cause dissatisfaction, that is the negative utility. Suppose if your stomach is full, then also you eat the another unit of commodity, then it will lead to dissatisfaction, that is the negative utility. So these are the assumptions and concepts of law of diminishing marginal utility. Now we will explain with the help of example. Now explanation, here we take the example of any imaginary consumer who is eating the rasgullas. Now in the first column number of rasgullas, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. So that consumer has a capacity of eating the 9 rasgullas, so we take the 9 rasgulla. Then second column is about the marginal utility, third one is about the total utility. So if that consumer eat the first rasgulla, he get the marginal utility of 15, so total utility will be 15. Then again he eat the second rasgulla, he get the marginal utility of 13, means lesser than first. Then total utility will be 15 plus 13, 28. Then he eat the third rasgulla, he get the marginal utility of 10, which is lesser than second. Then total utility become 38. Then he eat the fourth rasgulla, he got the marginal utility of 8. Then total utility become 38 plus 8, 46. Then at the fifth rasgulla, when he eat the fifth rasgulla, he get the marginal utility of 4. Then total utility become 50. Then at the sixth rasgulla, he get the marginal utility of only 2. Then total utility is 52. But at the seventh rasgulla, when his stomach become full, then also he eat the seventh rasgulla, so there should not be no marginal utility, so marginal utility is 0, so total utility remains same, that is 52. So that is the point, means seventh rasgulla is the point of 0 utility, and first rasgulla, that is the 15, that is the point of initial utility, means from the first rasgulla he get the marginal utility of 15, that is the point of initial utility, and seventh rasgulla, at that point that consumer derives no addition in the marginal utility, so that is the point of 0 utility. Then after his stomach is full, his capacity is over, then also forcefully if he eat the 8th and 9th rasgulla, the 8th rasgulla will yield the -2 marginal utility, so total utility will be decreases by 2, it will be 50. And again if he eat the 9th rasgulla, so there will be the marginal utility of -5, so the total utility also decreases to 45. So that 8th and 9th rasgulla, that is the point of negative utility, means if he eat the 8th and 9th rasgulla, he will get, or it will cause dissatisfaction to that consumer, so that is the negative utility. So this is the example for the law of diminishing marginal utility. So here given the explanation, as the consumer goes on eating the rasgulla, the additional or marginal utility goes on decreasing, means according to the statement of the law, the commodities at the stock of commodities increases, the marginal utility decreases. Means as the number of rasgulla increases, marginal utility will decrease. Okay, so as the consumer goes on eating the rasgulla, the additional or marginal utility goes on decreasing. At the 7th rasgulla, there will be no yield or no additional satisfaction, means it becomes 0, and at the 8th and 9th rasgulla, that 8th and 9th rasgulla gives the negative utility. So their consumption, instead of giving satisfaction or pleasure, causes the dissatisfaction. So if you look at the column 3, you will find that total utility goes on increasing up to the point or up to the certain level, means up to the 52 total utility goes on increasing. Up to the 6th rasgulla total utility was increasing, but at 7th rasgulla total utility become same, because there is no addition into the marginal utility. But after 7th rasgulla, means on the 8th and 9th rasgulla, total utility decreases. Okay, if you look at the more carefully, you will notice that although the total utility goes on increases, it increases only at diminishing rate. So this is about the explanation. Now if we plot this example on the graph paper, it will give you the diagrammatic representation. So from the first rasgulla, he get the maximum utility of 15. From the second, he get the utility of 13, that is lesser than first one. From the third, he get the again lesser utility. From fourth, again lesser. So at the 7th rasgulla, he did not get any utility. So at the 7th rasgulla, the utility is 0. So here on the x-axis, we have taken the units of commodity, that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8 and 9. It is up to the 9 rasgullas. On the y-axis, we have taken the marginal utility. So line AB, indicates the utility derived from consumption of first unit. Utility derived from the consumption of first unit. Then line CD indicate utility derived from second unit. Then line EF indicates utility derived from third unit. Then line GH indicates the utility derived from fourth unit. Line KL indicates utility derived from fifth, and line MN indicates utility derived from the sixth. So this is about the diagrammatic representation. Now at the 7th rasgulla, there is 0 utility, and after 7th rasgulla, there is minus marginal utility, and that minus marginal utility is indicated by shaded area. Okay, so U dash is the utility curve. Now explanation of this graph. So on OX and OY are the two axes. We have taken the commodities on OX axis, and we have taken the marginal utility on the OY axis. So U dash is the utility curve. So AB is the utility from the first rasgulla, CD is the additional utility from the second. Then if we observe the line AB and line CD, so line CD is lesser than or smaller than line AB, because from first rasgulla he got the utility of 15, and from the second rasgulla he got the utility of 13. That's why line CD is smaller than line AB. Now so the additional utility of other successive units are line EF, GH, KL and MN. So it can be seen that each step the additional utility becomes smaller and smaller. Means marginal utility or additional utility goes on decreasing. That's why the lines are become smaller and smaller. Now but at the 7th rasgulla, there is no addition at all into the marginal utility. So the marginal utility at 7th Rasgulla is 0, then it becomes negative, means if the forcefully that particular consumer eat the 8th and 9th Rasgulla, that utility becomes negative. So and that negative utility is represented by the shaded area below the x axis. Here in the shaded area for the 8th and 9th Rasgulla, they are indicating the negative utility. So this is about the graphical representation or diagrammatic representation. Now we have to know about the importance of law of diminishing marginal utility. So what is importance of this law? So this law has a great importance into the taxation. Government imposes the tax. So in that taxation, this law has a great importance. So we have seen that law is applicable in the sphere of taxation, or law is applicable in the taxation system of the government or in the fiscal policy of the government. So as a man's income increases, he is more heavily taxed. Means as a man's income increases, the tax amount also increases. For the utility of money to a rich person is less than to the poor person. Means as we know, the rich person, they are having the very less utility of the money because they are having more amount of money. So the principle of progressive taxation is based on law of diminishing marginal utility. So progressive taxation means as the income increases, the amount of tax increases. So this principle of progressive taxation is based on law of diminishing marginal utility. Now the law of diminishing marginal utility has a great importance in the determining prices. So the law also applies in the determination of market prices. As the increase in the supply, the lower should be the price. The increase in the supply, the lower should be the price. Means if there is supply of any commodity is increases, so the price will decreases. So in the determining the prices, this law of diminishing marginal utility is applicable. Suppose we have a lot of amount of production, we got the surplus production, we will supply or we will transport that production to the market, and you will observe that if there is a surplus supply, means more supply, the prices will reduces, means the utility of that commodity reduces. That's why the law of diminishing marginal utility is applicable, applies to the determining the prices into the market. So in the support of socialism, so socialists take their stand on this law when they advocate more equal distribution of wealth. Means in the wealth distribution, they apply this law of diminishing marginal utility. So because according to this law, beyond a certain point, the wealth will have a less utility to reach a man, so it is transferred to the poor and it will have a greater utility. So this law is supports to the socialism. The next, in the household expenditure, as this law regulates our daily expenditure pattern, as we go on buying more and more of commodity, its marginal utility falls. Suppose if you are going to buy same commodity every day, its marginal utility will decreases. So this law is applicable in the household expenditure. Then most important, this law of diminishing marginal utility is the basis of some economics laws. So several very important laws of economics and concept of economics, they are based on law of diminishing marginal utility. So example, law of demand is based on law of diminishing marginal utility. Then concept of consumer surplus is also the repetition of law of diminishing marginal utility. Then concept of elasticity of demand, law of substitution, they are the based on the law of diminishing marginal utility. So this is about the importance of law of diminishing marginal utility. Now at the last or at the end, we will discuss the limitations of law of diminishing marginal utility. While discussing the limitation, always keep in mind you have to write opposite to the assumptions. Just opposite to assumptions, these are the limitations of that law. Now first, the dissimilar units. As we know, our first assumption was the units of commodity must be a similar. It must have similar size, shape, color, taste, maturity. Means homogeneity is the basic requirement of law. So what will be the limitation of this law? If we apply this law on dissimilar units of commodity, this law will not applicable. So in case of dissimilar units, if the units are not identical, this law will not be applied. So for instance, if second rasgulla is much larger than first, then it will yield more satisfaction to consumer. Okay, so this law will not apply on the dissimilar units. It requires the similar units. Then very small units, means this law is not applicable on the very small units. Suppose if we are giving a water by a spoon, when we are thirsty, so each successive spoon will give the more satisfaction. Means this law, simply this law is not applicable on the very small units of commodity. Then too long an interval. As we know, basic requirement or basic assumption of this law, there should not be a gap or there should not be a time interval between the consumption process. That is the basic requirement or assumptions of law. So limitation is too long an interval. So the law applies only when the units of commodity taken quickly or consumed quickly one after another within the particular or reasonable period of time. Means if we take the time or if you take the interval between the eating process or between the consumption process, so this law is not applicable in such a cases. So change in income, habit, taste. So if the income changes, habit changes, taste of consumer changes, this law is not applicable to the such consumers. Then next, in case of rare collection, so the law does not apply in case of the rare collection. Suppose a particular person, he has a hobby of collecting the rare coins, rare notes. He will get more and more satisfaction. He collects the greater or he collects the more and more notes and more coins. So in such case, the law of diminishing marginal utility is not applicable. Suppose I have a hobby of collecting the rare cards. Suppose the post office card. I have a hobby of collecting the post office card. So the more and more card I will get more and more satisfaction. So in that case, the law of diminishing marginal utility is not applicable. Now, law is not applicable in case of abnormal persons. Means when we discuss about this law, we are talking about the normal persons or we think about the rational consumer. So, but there are some abnormal persons also, some misters. More money a mister has, he will get more and more satisfaction. Okay, then therefore this law is not applicable to the abnormal persons like misters, drunkards who want more and more commodity as they like it. Okay, and last, change in another person's stock. Sometimes utility changes not because of change in the stock of commodity of that person, but become change in the persons of another stock. It is because of jealousy also. Okay, so this is about the limitations of law of diminishing marginal utility, and you can refer the book of Agricultural Economics by Subba Reddy and another book, The Elementary Economic Theory by K.K. Dewett and J.D. Varma. Thank you.